Jai Bhim and Namo Buddhaya to all of you who are joining the second session of our ongoing course on Learn Dhamma through Jataka Tales. And today we are going to look into some of the very important aspects of the Jataka Tales. And I'm going to share my presentation. So, where is my presentation? Okay, so here we go. So this is the second session of our six sessions on Learn Dhamma with Jataka Tales, and we have had our first session last week, and we covered a lot of ground in that session, understanding what are the Jataka Tales and how they can directly speak to us and how they are important for us to practice and learn the Dhamma. So today we are going to move a little bit further. I titled this second session as Entering the World of Bodhisattva, or Bodhisatta as we call it in Pali. And the subtitle is From the Path Bodhisatta to the goal, that is to the towards the Buddhahood. And I think I found this photograph very interesting. I took it in the Kaniri caves, where there are very ancient Buddhist caves in Bombay, and these are very beautifully carved steps in the mountains, which sort of takes you to the top of the mountain. So I found that this photograph aptly represents what we are going to talk today. So let's begin with a little bit of refreshing our memory from the past. So, there are some of the key insights from Stephen Collins about systematic thoughts and narrative thoughts. So, this is what he says, that the Pali systematic thought attempts to resolve value conflicts. And how does it do it? By hierarchization and by the use of a very large number of interconnected lists. So we've seen that the systematic thought in Buddhism is about the interconnected list, like Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, 12 Nidanas, and so on and so forth. And he contrasts that with the systematic thought, saying that narrative thoughts states them, the values. So the narrative thoughts actually doesn't go after the list, but it states them. And the birth stories can be enjoyed, admired by everyone for many different reasons without being subjected to the classificatory categories of, for example, the Eightfold Path, conditioned origination, and still less since in the birth stories, that is in the Jataka, it does not occur Nibbana. So, you don't see the word Nibbana in the Jataka Tales. So, what Professor Collins says that, anybody can enjoy the birth stories because, they are not subjected to the classificatory categories, and therefore they are very easy to access. And I think I found this quote very interesting, that it's surely no more than common sense to recognize that people react to problems, ideas, and events. We all do face the problems. We dabble with the ideas and we engage with the events. And how do we do it? By telling stories about them, or by understanding them in terms of already known stories, as well as, and sometimes at the same time as, by thinking logically and scientifically about them. And that what counts as a good story is not the same as what counts as a good argument, and vice versa. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through a lot of stories. Briefly, I'm going to narrate them and going to see how we can make sense of the very different stories that are there in the Jataka Tales. But I thought this is also very important to think about the Jataka Tales in terms of the individual stories, because as I told you, there are about 547 stories. Some people say 550 stories, and there are individual stories. But some of the scholars says that individual stories are important, but we have to look at the Jataka tells in terms of the collections, because according to the scholars, the Jataka stories are redacted in collections. So it is not that one story was redacted, right, edited and re-edited, but the collection, together was redacted, and the collection as a whole contains problematization and conflicts of values. So you see a lot of values in conflict in different stories, and that's what makes the collection of the Jataka Tales very interesting. We can enjoy the individual stories, but the more repertoire we have of the as many Jataka stories as we have, then we begin to see there is a conflict between the values, and as a whole contains problematization. and single collected set of narratives from the archives of the Pali literature. So as we know that, the stories were redacted as a collection, and now they form the, a very large volume of the Pali literature. And together, if you look at the 550 stories or 547 stories together, the collection offers the Bodhisatta path towards the Buddhahood. So you see how incrementally, step by step, in different sort of birth, the Buddha, perfected his personality. If in the words of Baba Ambedkar, he perfect, he purified himself so deeply and so thoroughly through the practices that are there in the Jataka Tales. And it will be also clear to us that Bodhisattva ideal is as much the part of Theravada Buddhism as it is the essential part of Mahayana Buddhism. As we know that, the Mahayana Buddhism is all about the Bodhisattva path, the quest for a person to become a Bodhisattva. But we see that if you look at the Jataka Tales, we can also see that Bodhisattva ideal is as much the part of Theravada Buddhism as it is the essential part of Mahayana Buddhism. And we can see through the life of Bodhisattva Baba Ambedkar, and his life can be seen through the framework of Jataka Tales, particularly 10 Paramitas. And that we can do for all the great Buddhists that we might encounter in our lives, that their life can be seen through the 10 Paramitas, particularly through the 10 Paramitas, as to how they practice 10 Paramitas in their lives. So I think this is very important that, this Gestaltian maxim that the whole is more than sum of its part. So as we engage with the Jataka tales, we can enjoy the individual stories. We can derive a lot of understanding from them, as we are going to study one very interesting Jataka tale. Um, but also as a collection, we can learn a lot from the collection itself. So I thought that before we enter into some of the arguments, it will be important to look at a brief history of the Buddhist textual development. As we know that Buddhism originated from the Magadha, and Magadha was, of course, the domain of the Nagas. And the language used by the Buddha was known as Magdi. And it is said that the Buddha might have developed a type of Magadhi to teach the Dhamma. Because even the Magad was, in Magad area also, as John is Bronkhorst great book, Greater Magadha has pointed out very conclusively about the various aspects of the Magadhan culture. So some of the scholars argue now that the Buddha might have developed what is called in the linguistic studies the koan, getting to teach his Dhamma using several different language, and he might have himself developed this language to teach the Dhamma. So the early Buddhist text can be found with textual and historical analysis of the extant corpus. Now we have the whole corpus of text available, and we can look at the different layers in the Tripitaka. We can find out through certain methods which are the older versions, which are the newer versions, and so on and so forth. And as I was referring to John S. Bronkhorst's great studies, he says the Buddhism did not arise in the background of the Vedas and the Brahminical society, because the greater Magadha was a very different sort of a cultural milieu, as it were, and the Brahmanism was not strong there. And we can see that from the Pali Tripitaka itself, the society at the time, that there were Brahmin villages, but they were not at the as we see in the latter developments, at the very center of it. So the Brahmins were at the fringe in the Magadha. And how the period of Vedas is guessed based on the Buddhist text is very important. What happens is, according to scholars now, the Buddhism and Jainism developed a concept of deep time without beginning and without end, because they both the systems, like the Shramanic tradition, doesn't believe in the creator God, that the world was created by some omnipotent God. They don't believe it, because they cannot ascertain the beginning and the end of the world. So they rely on the concept of deep time and the innumerable cycles of births and deaths, rebirth and redeaths within that particular deep time. And the idea of karma and rebirth is absent in the Vedas. And some of the scholars have misled by putting the Upanishads before Buddhism, as the idea of karma and rebirth is also found in the Upanishads but not found in the Vedas. So this is totally unacceptable, as the Upanishads must have derived this idea from Buddhism, as some of the scholars have shown, like particularly Naomi Appleton, about whom we are going to hear a lot. She has written a book on karma and rebirth in Buddhism and Jainism, very fascinating book, showing how they form the ideas, important ideas in Jainism and Buddhism. That's Shamanic tradition. So, not the other way around. The fact that only the Buddhist texts can be dated with certainty as they are evidenced by the inscriptional evidences. So, how do you ascertain that the certain oral text is older? Is through the third party evidence. So, for example, we have the evidence of the Buddhist text written, inscribed by the Ashoka. And based on that, we can know that, this is the Buddhist, ideas or the canons were written at that particular time. And the idea of karma and rebirth is found there, and the scholars have misled, saying that because the idea of karma and rebirth is found in Upanishad might be older than Buddhism, but it's not true. So I wanted to bring this to you because it's very important, because some of the people have raised a lot of questions. So there is a need to clarify the ground that how the Buddhist texts were Brahmanized. This the redaction went on for 1,000 years, and after the decline of Ashokan Empire, the Brahmins rose to political power and favored Sanskrit. The epics such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, Manusmriti, and other Dharma Shastras were written during the period of the period by the committee of Brahmins. That's what Al Fittelberg, a great scholar of Dharma Shastras, who says that as to how the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Manusmriti, and Dharma Shastras were written. They are the post Ashokan development. And after that came Ashwagosha's Buddha Charitra and Saundarananda situates Buddhism in the Brahminical setting and background. So we start off see the ideas, the Brahminical background becoming very important in the work of Ashwagosha's Buddha Charitra and Saundarananda. This happened after 500 years after the Buddha's Mahaparinirvan. Buddhists adopted Sanskrit language to accommodate the political developments unfolding at the time. However, the Buddhists went on composing their books in what is known also as the Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, the sort of the Prakrit-based Sanskrit language, and the Pali text were settled after 1,000 years. Buddha Gusa played an important role in settling the Pali text. Do a lot of question people now, at least some of the people question, Buddha Ghosha's redaction as well. So in the Pali Jatakas, or in Jatakas in general, you will find Indra, you will find Brahma, you will not find Vishnu directly, but we can find his avatars in terms of Rama and Krishna. So how do we make sense of those characters today? So you imagine a society where they have the common stock of the ideas and the stories, and they shared characters and shared literary universe as it were. But if you look at that, the Indra is completely gone now from the contemporary world. But in the Jataka stories, the Shakra or Sakka, who is in Pali called Sakka or in Sanskrit called Shakra, features many times, many times, at least 20 Jataka Tales. And this is very interesting that there is not one Indra or one Shakra or one Sakka. There are like millions of them, and they inhibit different sort of the cosmological sort of spaces. But there is a caveat which says that these are all psychological dimensions. They do not have the socio-spatial reality. We cannot find the Brahma world in the spatial or in the social world. So they are just psychological states that we can talk about in the context of meditation and Abhidhamma. But this is not a topic that we are going to go through. So just to keep in mind that there is also Brahma. He comes in these four forms, and also there are many universes of the Brahma. And the notable is of course the Brahma Sampati, who requested the Buddha to preach, and that's episode we also find in the Buddha and Dhamma. But some scholars are now saying that the Brahma Vihar, the very important teaching of the Buddha, it has been described in terms of the highest abode, that is Nibbana, which can be reached by practicing friendliness, that is Metta, compassion, Karuna, and joyful mind, Mudita, and Upekka, the unbound vision. And we are going to see in the upcoming classes a bit about Dasratha Jataka, where the Ram is the hero, and also in Katna, there is Krishna as a hero. And they are now known as the avatars of Vishnu. So you see, this is the development we started off, as we have seen in the previous lecture, as to how the Jataka stories were built on the basis of the gathas. And I told you from gathas to katha as to how they were developed. So I'm going to show you what precautions we have to take when we study the Jataka stories. So there are some shared characters, like these all characters are shared by Jainism and that Brahmanism and Buddhism at that time. But there is very important information for us. However, the Jataka tells, as we examine how they aim to cultivate wisdom and wise persons with the Buddha as the highest moral authority and example. So in every Jataka story, there is a side of kind of a direction which is built up in the Jataka tells, in the collection of Jataka tells, that is towards the Buddha as the highest moral authority and example. And wherever we find the mention of any of these mythological figures, suffice here is to say that they are subordinate to the Buddha, and to the Buddha, all the mythical characters pay respect and homage. So even in the Jataka tales, even you can see that is happening even in the Buddhist canonical literature. We can see that is happening. So mainly, the Jataka story is centered around the Bodhisattva, the life of the Bodhisattva. There are different characters. It's not just that there are gods and there are human beings, but there are also Nagas. There are also the tree deities. There is also the Bodhisattva was also animal, even the insect, in one of his births. So you see, this is all the spectrum of personality. I would look at it as a kind of a spectrum of personality, as different life forms, the different mental states, and the Buddha as a Bodhisattva in different mental states, as to how he respond to the environment or the situation around him. So, you know, to put it in perspective, we have 22 vows of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who offers us a very clear-cut direction as to how we are going to look at the mythological figure. As which is very clear, the Buddha is not the avatar of any god, and this is the propaganda of the Brahmins, that the Buddha is the avatar, but it's not the case. The Buddhists do not regard Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh as the gods, because there is it is not it it doesn't believe in the creator gods. And the Buddhists do not regard Rama and Krishna of the Brahminical epics. Rather, they are considered the counter-revolutionary characters, as Baba Sahib Ambedkar has shown. And the Buddhists regard the Buddha as the sole personality that leads their lives, and they only take refuge in the Buddha and no one else. So, these are very important sort of the things that we have to bear in mind. So, just by the way of building our base to study the Jataka tales, which we are going to study some of them. So karma and rebirth in Buddhism, Jainism, and Brahmanism. Very fascinating research is coming up. So the idea of deep time and infinite space originated in the Shramnik tradition. The beginning and the end cannot be experienced or known. We cannot find the end or the beginning of a circle. That's what his argument put in the Milinda Prashna. Same is the case with the karma. Nobody can find the beginning of the karma, and the world undergoes cycles, patterns. There are different patterns which emerge in the world based on the theory of cause and effect. And Ambedkarite Buddhism offers a perspective on karma as the basis of moral order. So whether the moral order is good or bad, that depends on the karma. That doesn't depend on any god or any third party. The human beings can intervene any time in the process of transformation of self and the world. That's what is made clear by the Buddha. Anytime we can intervene and change. So Ambedkar Buddhism is based on here and now. The theory of rebirth is questioned, and instead of that, it advocates humanistic Buddhism. That's what we can do on this earth itself. How to transform the life on the earth itself, instead of thinking about what is going to happen in the future. And as we know that Buddhism is compatible with the democratization of the society, which means justice in this life itself. So I think these are some very important points through which we can look at the Jataka tells. There is a caveat lecture, the very beautiful word which says, let the readers be aware. So, as a reader, when we engage with the Jataka stories, we be aware of different pitfalls when we study them today, and how we can be aware when we study the Jataka tales is very important. And particularly Stephen Collins says some of the people started to rearrange the Jataka stories according to the chronology. And Stephen Collins says that the chronology of the Jataka stories is pointless exercise. There's no point in saying which story comes first and which story came later, and so on and so forth. He says he found that very futile, though some of the scholars have tried to do that. So we can say archaeology of the Jataka tales. So he thinks that the archaeology of the Jataka tales is a pointless exercise. He says reading karma and rebirth in the Jataka tales is a futile exercise. We cannot say that this birth led to that birth. The birth in this karma led to that rebirth in the other life. We cannot establish that. So he also find it as a futile exercise. The collection as a whole has a common thread that culminates in the enlightenment of the Siddhartha Gautama. And it's very important to understand the constituent elements without which the story cannot function. And there are supplementary elements. So you see, there are certain elements in the story which are, like without which that story is not possible. And then, when the stories are redacted, people go on adding the supplementary elements like new characters or change the end of the story, but the basic constituent element of that particular Jataka tale cannot be changed. So that is like a kind of a framework of the story, and the other things, supplementary elements, can be added or subtracted. So understand the characters in the story in the context of the plot in the story, and not historically or even cosmo historically. The peripheral actants can change, but the Bodhisattva remains the central figure, and his quest towards enlightenment remains the central figure in most of the Jataka tales. So, didactic literature, like the literature that educates or trains us, like the Jataka tales, offers perspectivalism. There is not just one perspective; there are many perspectives. So, when we engage with the story, all of us can come up with the different perspectives, and we don't strive to come to one perspective. It's subjected to multi interpretations, many interpretations, and then it leads to the diversity of the thoughts. So, we are not trying to create a kind of a coherence that the systematic thought try to create. Jataka stories by their very nature, or didactic literature by its very nature, has this multi-perspective dimension, and is subjected to multiple interpretations and diversity of the thoughts. So, last time I briefly touched upon how Stephen Collins has classified the Jataka tales, and I'm going to go through some of them to give you an idea as to how there are 550 or 547 Jataka tales, all of them very interesting, very difficult to categorize them. But by the way, to get grasp or how we understand them, this is a classification that uh, Stephen Collins have brought in. He says, one of the classifications is apparently simple stories, and I'm going to tell you one very simple story. And then there is Dhamma one stories relating to friendship, care for parents, and justified violence as well. And there is, of course, comedy, a very sometimes, unacceptable comedy, but there are some comedy Jataka tells, naughty comedies, as Venerable Dhammika would say. Then there are talking animal stories. There are just stories as to how something has come into being, like how the alcohol, for example, has come into play. Then there are karma and rebirth stories, but they cannot be internally construed, as I told you. We have to bring some external ideas to understand them. I'm not going to go into that. And philosophical story like Mahabodhi Jataka, and then Abhidhamma based stories, that there is some content of Abhidharma reflected in three or four stories, but I'm not going to go through them today. These last two, I'm going to do that in the next session. But this is very important classification. So let's go into apparently simple stories. So I'm going to go take you through some simple stories. Like, this is a very interesting story, the birth story about the a crocodile, and it's a very interesting story. As you can see, there is a monkey and there is a crocodile, and the story is very very interesting. It's called Sumsumar Jataka, and the story goes like this: that Sumsumar is, of course, a crocodile in Pali language, and it's a very interesting story, a little bit funny story, but I'm going to relate that to you. So, the future Buddha was a big monkey, and he lives on one bank of the river Ganges. So you see, he's living on one bank of the river Ganges, and in the river there is a crocodile, and his wife is described as his bharya wife, Mrs. Crocodile, a humanized form who speaks. And elsewhere, she is Sumsumari, the female crocodile, and she becomes pregnant and she longs to eat the big monkey's heart. So she wants to eat the Bodhisattva monkey's heart, and it's her in the animal form. It's natural desire. Because crocodile is a non-vegetarian animal, so it's a natural. But in the human form, it's not. It's something which is very very bad. And she is, of course, carnivorous, and she wants her husband to bring the heart of the monkey, Bodhisattva monkey, and Mr. Crocodile thinks of how he can lure the monkey, and he goes to the monkey and he asks why he is living in such a crowded, dreary place. And he says that, on the other side of the river there is many trees which are laden with fruits sweet to eat, and he makes an offer to the monkey that he will carry him to the other shore so that he can enjoy his life. He hides his original motivation. So the monkey agrees, and then he sits on his back, and they are swimming through the river. And when he approaches his dwelling place, the crocodile start descending down in the water. And then the monkey thinks that something is wrong, and what to do now. So he asks crocodile his intention, and the crocodile Sumsumar reveals his intention, that his wife is craving for his heart. She wants to devour his heart. And then the monkey uses some of his intelligence, and of course Bodhisattva monkey, he says that we monkeys do not carry our heart in our bodies, because we jump here and there. Because we jump here and there, our hearts might fall down, so we keep our hearts on the trees. And he shows from the distance the fig tree, whose fruit looks like heart from the distant. So he says that my heart is there, hanging on the tree. So if you take me there, I will bring that for you. And the monkey fools crocodiles think, oh, okay, this monkey agrees to bring his heart. He takes them to back to the shore from where they came, and monkey jumps from his back on the other shore, and he says that I have cheated you, foolish crocodile. Keep however many fruits hearts you want. you know the example of the heart. Your body is big, but your wisdom, panya, the word used is panya, pradnya, is small. So, we know what moral we can draw from this. It is said that this is the only story in the Pali Jataka where the Buddha tells a lie. And, the telling the lie is one of the greatest of the, evil actions that one can do. And the positive counter of that is Satchakariya, telling the truth. And the power of, by the power of telling the truth, as we see in the Buddhist text, a lot of things can be done. But here, of course, the evil crocodile is Devadatta, and the monkey is, of course, the Buddha. So it's all up to us as to what inference we can draw from this, because this is the didactic literature is trying to teach us something. So these are apparently simple stories which are there in the Pali Jatakas. They are like the fables of Aesop, and we know the lot of fables of Aesop, particularly the story of the fox and the crow. The crow steals the meat, and he's on the tree, and there are different versions of that. The fox tries to fool the crow by saying that your voice is good when you sing. You create a beautiful melodious voice, and that's how the crow is fooled. And he opens his mouth to sing, and the meat falls down from his beak, and it's taken by the. So there are these all the stories that we are hearing from the childhood. So the point here is to really understand the different genre, the different categories of the stories in the tells. So this tale also comes as the Vanara Jataka. So it has two names, Sumar Jataka and also Vanara. In Pali Jataka tales, you find a lot of these plots are repeated. The gathas. One gatha will have several stories. Several stories will have one gatha. This is all, it's very it's very sort of complex world of Jataka tales, but very interesting world. So there are stories like some quotidian Dhamma one stories, like there is a story of friendship, parent, how we can respect and look after our parents, and there is also a story of a justified violence. So Sri Kalakani Jataka, Sri Kalakani means, Kalakani means the black ear. So it's a very interesting Jataka on friendship, and I'm not going to go into that, but just to bring to you the bare bones of the story, that Anathapindaka, one of the greatest disciples of the Buddha in the past, was born with had a friend, and his friend was looked down by other people. But Anath Pindaka in his past life kept his friendship with him, and even people despised him. He helped him to manage his store, and as the story goes, with his help, he could get a lot of profits, and that's the story of the friendship. And the Buddha, of course, there is in the story the Buddha is an observer. So this I found it very interesting because this is something that has to do with the world today. So a name is just a matter of convention. So whether your name is black ear one or golden ear one or whatever your name is, the Buddha says here that a name is just a matter of convention, and so is the caste, so is the the various terms that we use to divide the people. It's just a matter of convention. This is just used as a matter of convention. The wise do not make a name the measure of someone. So you see, the wise do not make a name or caste or class or gender as a measure of someone. So very deep insight here. It is not right to behave in certain way just because one has heard something auspicious. I will not get rid of a friend with whom I played with mud pies because of his name. You see, and it's extendable, because of the labels, because of the caste, because of the gender, because of whatever that separates two human beings. Anath Pindaka says in the Sri Kalakanni Jatak, through of course the mouth of Buddha, that a name is just a matter of convention. And he says, a name is not the measure, a friendly attitude is the measure. So, how we cultivate metta, friendly attitude is of course metta. Metta is the measure. How we look at somebody as we look at ourselves. That's the key. Not because they have a certain name, because they come from certain social background, whether they are rich or poor, whatever they are, it doesn't matter. That is not the measure of who they are. The real measure of them can be done only with the friendliness or metta. So, what lesson we can draw from the Sri Kalakanni Jatak? It's friendship is very important. Sama Jatak is very interesting Jatak, a very interesting story of someone who is serving his blind parents and who is you know uh, hit by the arrow of a king, and he's about to die, and the king goes to him, and he says that he has to leave because he has to look after his parents, and the how his life is saved, and the lessons he gives to 10 Dasa Dhamma to the king as to how he should follow. A very interesting dialogue, very interesting Jataka as to how we can, filial pithi, they say, how we can look after parents. There is very interesting Jataka which justifies violence, which is called the Bilara Jataka. The Bilara Jataka is, of course, this is the Bilara Jataka, very beautiful artistic sort of rendering of all the Jataka stories in several temples, in several vihars in Burma, in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, and of course in Ajanta, Barut, everywhere you go. I'm going to talk about this artistic dimension of that in the coming classes. But you see here the rat is eating the jackal, because the jackal comes to the rats, the king of the rats, and says that he's Dhammika. He is the one who follows the Dhamma, and he's going to look after them. And what happens when they queue up? The jackal eats the last rat, and then the rat king, the Bodhisattva king, realizes that something is wrong, and he finds how the jackal tricks the rats, and then once he realized that, they they kill the jackal together, holding the throat of the jackal, as we can see in the story Bilara Jataka, the story of the justified violence. One of the very interesting thing, they are very rich sort of a literature. The language is beautiful. If we can read them in the original Pali. He says that the I'm going to read how some of the depiction of that. The jack tries to capture him, but the future Buddha mouse criticizes him, saying that his righteousness is not real, just a disguise. So there are people comes in the form of righteousness. They wear the disguise of righteousness, but inside they are very dangerous. And he then jumps at the jackal, bites his throat, killing him. The other mice come back and eat the jackal, making a sound. I suppose we might translate as munch munch, but in Pali is much better. Crunch crunch, mura mura. The sound that the rats make is mura mura. In the Pali, it sounds very beautiful. No, the sounds and all, the sense and the sounds of the language. And this Jataka is very interesting because the title of the Jataka is Bilar is, of course, a cat. So in some of the stories, it's a cat, and some of the stories is jackal. So it's very interesting. And then of course there is a story of the Baka Jataka. Baka is of course about a crane, and the crane similarly, uh, fools the fish, saying that she will or he will carry them to the other point, where there is enough food and all. And we, most of us, know the story that the crane deceives some fish and eats them, and the story ends with a crab avenging them by biting the heron's throat. So you see here the Buddha. Where is the Buddha here in the story? He is, of course, here, a witness, reborn as a tree spirit who sees the whole thing and congratulates the crab and speaks an ironic verse. This person skilled in deceit, Nikati Panno, does not find happiness completely, just like the heron, skilled in deceit, only found success from the crow. So you see, these are very interesting sort of the categorization of the Jataka. We will find a lot of these Jataka tales in the Jataka repertoire. There is a comedy, and as I told you, naughty Jataka tale is about a turtle and Kachapa and a monkey, who is very naughty monkey, and he puts his private organ in the ear of the ascetic. And when he is meditating, and all the time, he's putting his organ in his ears. And one day there is a turtle who is sleeping with the open mouth, and the monkey insert his organ in his mouth, and he bites on that. So these monkeys in a tremendous pain. They go to the ascetic, and like you can see here, and the ascetic, he says, because he has to also free monkey, he tells turtle that the people from the two jatis, if they engage in the copulation or a sexual act, they cannot bear an offspring. That's what he says. And that makes Kachapa or turtle laugh, and because he laughs, he opens his mouth, and that's how the monk is released. And both Stephen Collins and Mika find it a very naughty story on the Jataka titles. And there, of course, another comedy story, which is Temia Jataka, also known as Mugapakka, dumb cripple. So the Bodhisattva to be the Buddha to be the Bodhisattva, poses himself as a Muga or a dumb, but he is not, because he cannot take part in the episodes or in the actions that will ultimately create unhappiness. I'm going to tell this Jataka in the future. And there are, of course, talking animal stories. Why do people tell them? There's a question Stephen asked. But, this is a story which is very interesting story. And this is the Jataka is called of course, Abhinna Jataka. It's a very, very interesting story that we can see. In the Abhinna Jataka, there is a friendship between the dog and the elephant. And when the elephant eats his food, some foods fall down, and the dogs relish on that fallen food. But one day the dog disappears, is taken by the king's people, and the elephant becomes sad. He cannot find his friend, and he quits eating. And then people realize that because the separation between them two has made elephant sad, so they bring back the dog, and then dog and elephant again live happily. This story, the hare in the moon, like in the moon we see the Sasa Jataka. Sorry, this is a misspelling. The name of the Jataka is Sasa Jataka. And it's a very interesting story. As you can see here, there is a fire lit here. There is a Sasa, or the hare, and there is an ascetic, the Shakra, or if he's the Indra figures here in the story. I'm going to reveal the story to you because it's a very interesting story. And and the story goes like this, that so this is one of the most popular stories in the Jataka. The hare in the moon. Four animals: a hare, a monkey, a jackal, and an otter, live in close proximity. They are both friends and wise. Pandit. The hare regularly gives sermons to the other three on the day preceding an Uposatha day, a day on which one observes abstinence, gives gifts, and so on. The hare urges his friends to practice observances, in particular giving to beggars. The otter goes off and finds some fish that a fisherman has buried in the ground. The otter digs them up, holds them up, and shouts, "Does anyone own these?" Not getting an answer, he takes them home. Is this theft? The jackal goes on and finds in an absent field watcher's hut a spit for cooking meat, a lizard, and a pot of milk curds. He also asks if they have an owner, and getting no answer, takes them home. Theft again. This is what Steve Collins says, that it's also, theft. Is it a theft? He asks, he puts a question mark. The monkey goes into a wood and finds some mangoes, not this time belonging to anyone else. Then, all of his three friends have something to make dana. So they get something to make dana because of the uposat. Now the hare or the sasa reflects that he has nothing to give because the human beggars won't eat grass, which as an animal the hare lives on. So he forms the intention to offer his own body as meat. That is the intention forms in the mind of the Bodhisattva Sasa. As is usual in such cases of high or extreme virtue, Atidana, I'm going to talk about Atidana in the future classes, which sits Shakka, the king of the god, grows hot. So, in all the Jatakas, when somebody is practicing Atidana, the seat of the Shakra becomes hot and he cannot sit on that seat. So he looks down and sees what has happened and comes down to earth. He asks the first three animals for alms and they give him some of the food they acquired, properly or not. But when he comes to the hare, who has nothing, the hare announces his intention to roast his own flesh as his gift. Sakka creates a fire and hare jumps into it. But due to Sakka's power, the fire feels too hot, to hare, ice cold, and of course does not roast him. He asks what is happening. Sakka reveals himself and says he came just to test the hare's virtue, character, or morality or sila. Then he squeezes a mountain, takes its juice, a nice touch, and draws with it a picture of the hare on the moon. So that's how is the story of how you see the Sasa on the moon. This is the Jataka. The mountain is squeezed, and from it comes the juice, and from that juice, the Sasa is painted on the moon. So you see, I think this is a very emblematic story. Whenever we look at the moon, we can remember the hare, rabbit, thinking that how he was willing to sacrifice his life to make dana to the human beggars. And we can look at whenever we look at the moon like that with a hair on it, we can remind ourselves of this very beautiful, fascinating story, which is very popular story. There is, of course, another very interesting story, just so stories as to how something has emerged. And this is the story about how the alcohol has emerged. It's a very pretty long story. I'm not going to go into that. But this is how the uh, you know uh, the fermentation takes place beneath one tree, and the birds came and they drink and they sleep. And this ascetic Varuna observes as to how they are doing it. So that's how the sura is made, the fermented drink. So he of course drinks, and he also finds that how the sura is developed, and the name of the ascetic is Varuna. And Varuna and Sura both enjoy the drink, and they eat meat like all the humans do. Some of them, the way they party. And the two men, because there is a lot of that wine, Sura, the alcohol in the forest, they bring it to the city. The people in the city likes it so much, the townsmen get drunk, and the whole town get drunk. And they also trade the wine in the Banaras and Saket. They become filthy rich, and the king also wants to know what is it. And the king of course offers them the ingredients and 500 jars to brew alcohol. And but in the what happens, uh this there is a small plot there where the cat comes and drinks the alcohol, but and she gets drunk and fall asleep. Mice comes and bite off their ears, noses, teeth, and tails. The king thinks the two men must have made some poison, and the king wants to behead them. But then the cats wake up and moves around and plays. So the king realizes that it was not poison, it was the drink itself. But at this point, Sakka, the king of God, thinking that if the king starts to drink, all India will be destroyed. So if all India start drinking alcohol, the whole India will be destroyed. Comes to the earth in the disguised form, and that's how he persuaded the kings not to encourage the production and the trade of alcohol. But despite of the godly efforts and the kingly efforts, the story ends with a very wry note, as Stephen Collins says. But in India, drinking alcohol became widespread. So you see, these are very interesting stories that some of the stories that I want to tell you. As I glossed on this, I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go into philosophy and Jataka Tales in the upcoming class. That's the next class, and also I'm going to talk about these two things. Amber Carpenter analyzed very beautifully the Mahabodhi Jatak. We're going to go into that in the philosophical aspect of it in the next. Also, Abhidhamma and Jataka, the three very interesting Jataka tales. Javana Hansa Jataka, the teaching of momentariness. Kuru Dhamma Jataka, the role of intention. And Mahausa Jataka, skillful mind, which is related, which is very, very beautifully analyzed by Sarasha, one of the great translators of the Jataka Tales. I'm going to do that in the next class. Also story of Renunciate. Most of the people at the end of the kings particularly, they give up their kingdoms and they renunciate. They take what is called the Rushi Pabajja. Also, I'm going to talk about the 10 great birth stories, the last 10 big Jatakas, Mahanipat, in the upcoming sessions. So, just to end up before we go on to our story today, this is what Professor Appleton has brought a very interesting story as to how we can look at the Jataka story as a diverse and a changing genre. And she brings the Jataka story itself to explain, how it is. And a very beautiful Jataka, Kimsuk Upama Jataka. So Kimsuk is of course has, there is a spin on the word. Kimsuk means what tree. Kim is of course what. And of course, Kimsuk is the name of a very famous tree in India called the Palash. And this is a very, very interesting story, Jataka tale. So I'm going to read it. Charioteer seated the eldest son. The king had four sons, four princes, and there was a charioteer. So charioteer seated the eldest son in the chariot and took him to the forest, saying, this is the Kimsuka. He showed him the tree. At the time there was just a trunk. The next he showed at the time it was showing young foliage, and to the next prince at the time of flowering of the tree, and the next at the time of fruiting. Later, the four brothers were sitting together and raised the question, what sort of tree is the Kimsuka? One said, because he has seen it when it was just like a trunk, he says it is like a burnt pillar. The second, when he has seen it in the foliage stage, he says it's like banyan tree. The third says when it has seen in the flowering, the flowers of the Kimsuka or the Palash tree are just like the human flesh. He says it's like a piece of flesh. And the fourth, because he has seen it at the time of the fruiting, the fruits are just like the fruits of the acacia tree, babur, we say. So you see the four brothers, because they have seen the same tree in the different seasons, they have a very different view of the same tree. So here, let me show you, very interesting. This is what is the Palash tree. And this is how the Palash tree is seen when it's without fruits or flowers. It just looks like a banyan tree. When it's small, it's look like a trunk, and when it's fully flowering, it's look beautiful. It's there everywhere. Palash tree. If you travel from here, where I am from Nagpur to Varda, you can see it in the plenty. It looks very beautiful, and the flower looks like this, and the fruits look like the beans of acacia tree. So these four brothers, they have seen the Kimsuka tree at the different times. They have the different opinions of the same tree. But the chariot asked, all have seen the Kimsuka. Why now do you doubt? So why do you doubt now? You should have asked the chariot about all the conditions. And here comes the Buddha. Kimsuka Jataka, the story of our times. All have seen the Kimsuka. The story was told by the teacher while he was dwelling in Jetavana about the simile of the Kimsuka tree. Four monks approached the Tathagata and requested meditation subjects. The teacher gave them each a meditation subject, and having taken them, they each went to their daytime and nighttime abodes. One of them attained arahantship after contemplating the six sense bases, another the five aggregates, another the four great elements, and the other the 18 bases. They told the teacher about the characteristics of each of their attainments. Then a thought occurred to one monk and he asked the teacher, Nibbana is of one kind for all these meditation subjects. How can arahantship be attained by all these methods? The teacher replied, Monks, isn't this variation like that of the four brothers who saw Kimsuka tree? Bhante explained the meaning to us. The monks entreated, and so he told the story of the past. So this is the Kimsuka story. Very interesting story. So, in the next session also, I'm going to cover the various personality of the Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva as a good, as a hero, savior, teaching, and giving his own example, and of course the perfections. The 10 paramitas bad. The Bodhisattva is villain sometimes, and sometimes the karma is catching on him, and there is a conflict between ethics and wisdom in the mind of the Bodhisattva. Sometimes he makes a lot of ethical mistakes, and sometimes the Bodhisattva acts as a fool. We are going to look at that story also, and sometimes in the stories the Bodhisattva is insignificant. So let's go to the story that I have picked it up from what Kane and Vishaka has shared. We are going to read their version of the story. So I just wanted to bring in that this story is so important that it makes sense even today, and it's a story of the great sacrifice, Atidana, of the hungry tigress and the lotus in the sea. A very beautiful book written by Thich Nhat Hanh. And there is, of course, we know how much Baba Saheb Ambedkar has sacrificed his health life for us, and we can glean the story from his life as well. But this is Thich Quang Duc, a very famous monk who set himself afire and in the middle of the city, and created a lot of awareness towards the plight of the Buddhist in Vietnam that time. His photo came from the front piece of the international newspapers and changed the minds of the people. And of course, Thich Nhat Hanh refers to the story in a letter to Martin Luther King. They were friends. So I had a chance to visit this place where this monk sacrificed. So this is the story that we are going to look at. But I just wanted to bring it this story, the picture which is also there in Kane and Vishaka's rendering of it. And this is Shashin Shiko's Bodhisattva and Hungry Tigress from Japan. This I will explain that to you, but let's go to the story now, because I think the story is very important. So this is a story. I think our friend Jaimin Parikh is going to read it. So Jaimin, are you ready?
Yeah, yeah. Am I audible?
Okay, you are audible. Kindly read the story.
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. Let's begin. The starving tigress. Long, long ago, the Bodhisattva was born into a distinguished Brahmin family. As a youth, he excelled in all his studies, but he took no interest in the home life, resolving instead to follow the path of renunciation. By the purity of his virtue, many friends and acquaintances followed his example, left their families, and went to practice asceticism under his wise guidance. By the power of his meditation, all the creatures, even the fiercest in the area surrounding the forest hermitage where he and his students stayed, were pacified and became calm. He taught his disciples to observe morality, restraint of the senses, constant mindfulness, renunciation, and the meditation on loving kindness. His personal attendant was a young man named Ajit, who, along with most of the other students, was making good progress in his practice. One fine day, as the Bodhisattva was walking in the jungle with Ajit, he saw a young tigress lying at the mouth of a mountain cave. Her eyes were sunken, and her body was so emaciated that all of her ribs were visible. The great being saw that the tigress was panting and realized that she was so exhausted from having given birth that she could hardly move. Her newborn cubs were crawling towards her to nurse, but she snarled at them. Obviously, she had no milk for her blind cubs. She was too weak to stalk prey, and if she did not get something to eat, she would not even last out the day herself. Just as Meru is shaken by an earthquake, the Bodhisattva was moved with compassion by this pitiful sight. Look, Ajit, he cried, behold the worthlessness of Sansar. This new mother is being driven to feed on her very own young. Hunger will cause her to break the laws of maternal love. How powerful is self love that leads a mother to want to make a meal of her own offspring? The Bodhisattva immediately determined to relieve the tigress's suffering, but to distract his attendant, that is Ajit, he devised a ruse. Ajit, let's find some food for her, he suggested, to appease the fierce hunger of the tigress, so that she will not harm her own cubs. We must prevent her from committing that rash and terrible act. You look over there and I'll try something around here. As soon as his attendant had gone off in the search of food, the Bodhisattva exclaimed, why search for meat when the whole of my own body is available and free to give? This body is weak and unsubstantial. It is ungrateful, always impure, and a source of suffering. I rejoice this opportunity to give it for the benefit of another. It is my great opportunity and indeed my duty. There are two reasons that can lead one to disregard the suffering of another. One, attachment to one's own pleasure, and second, the inability to help. Knowing that the existence is suffering, I do not desire pleasure, but I certainly have the power to help. Thus, I cannot be indifferent. If I were to remain apathetic while perfectly capable of relieving her pain, I would be guilty of an evil deed that would lead to great remorse. Therefore, let me throw out myself down from the precipice and offer my cause to the tigress. I'll prevent her from the unwholesome act of devouring her cubs. I'll protect those young ones. Let them not be killed by their mother's pangs. With his attendant out of the way and unable to dissuade him, the Bodhisattva reflected further on his determination. Let me set an example for those who wish to do good in the world. May my generosity be properly understood by all. May it inspire those inclined to charity and confound those who are cynical, egotistical, and selfish. For a long time, I have wished to benefit others by making a gift of my own body. Let me accomplish that now, not for the sake of glory or heavenly rebirth, but for the sake of omniscience. Remaining firm in his resolution, the Bodhisattva removed his robe and hung it carefully on the branch of a tree. His mind filled with delight that he was sacrificing his body for the benefit of another, and he threw himself over the cliff. When the tigress heard the loud thud of Bodhisattva's body striking the rock, she lifted her hand and just to see what it was. Seeing the broken body, she completely forgot about slaughtering her little cubs and began gratefully devouring the bloody flesh. A few minutes later, Ajit, you remember who was a disciple of the Bodhisattva? He returned and saw his teacher's clothing neatly hanging on the tree. Looking over the cliff, he saw the young tigress feeding and immediately understood what had actually happened. How great was my teacher's compassion, he exclaimed. How kind of him to have sent me away, knowing that I might not be able to bear seeing him sacrifice himself. In death, he displayed his heroic and fearless compassion in a manner which is unmistakable. Throughout his life, he was as patient as the earth itself, but he could never bear to see others suffering. May his great compassion and his boundless goodness ever be venerated. May all revere him for generosity, the heroism, the magnificence by which he perfected himself for the sake of all the living beings. When Ajit told the other disciples what their teacher had done, they too extolled the Bodhisattva's virtue. Together, they returned to the spot, collected the gnawed bones, and reverently raised a stoop over them. How merciful was our teacher, they intoned, to those afflicted by the distress. How indifferent to his own welfare. He brought to perfection the virtues of generosity and compassion. Dev, Nag, Gandharv, Yaksh all joined in revering that stew with offering of treasure, gold, flowers, and sweet sandalwood powder. All praised the Bodhisattva's great compassion in sacrificing himself for the benefit of the starving tigress and her newborn cubs.
Thank you so much, Jamin. Very wonderfully revered. And Kane and Vishaka has put this letter from Thich Nhat Hanh to Reverend Martin Luther King. We don't need any introduction to them. Kane, would you like to say something about this? Kane and Vishaka? Hello?
Reading. That's
Yeah, yeah.
Good, very good reading. Thank you.
beautiful.
I just want to say that I think we can see that from this story, if we compare this story to the Nigroda Mika Jataka you read last year or last week, and the Sasa Jataka about the rabbit in the moon, all three are about sacrifice of one's body. But the difference is in this story, there's no intervention,
Yeah, that's right.
and the sacrifice is successful. Whereas in the Pali stories, there's always intervention, and the Bodhisatta never dies. I think that's very interesting.
Good.
But what I love about this story is that the what Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh makes very clear is that it's not suicide. It's not suicide at all. It's something far greater. I mean, suicide is from sadness and desperation. This is a free giving and an understanding that there's another life. There's another life, and I cannot allow her to commit this terrible this infanticide, to kill her own babies because maternal love is so important and so powerful. I love it. Beautiful reading. Wonderful. Well done.
And if we accept the concept of rebirth,
Yeah.
and that samsara is just a cycle that goes on and on and on, that
It's just another story.
it's not really death,
Hmm.
or it's death, but it continues, goes on to another life, and will continue. Just as a turning wheel
Yes.
touches the ground at only one point, our life is only one point,
Just
and it will
like-
go on.
Yes, yes, so wonderful.
Very beautiful.
Thank you. so
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The way you brought this letter and this particular line, the like the Buddha in one of his former lives, as told in the story of Jataka, who gave himself to a hungry lion, tigress, whatever, which was about to devour her own cubs. The monk believes he is practicing the doctrine of highest compassion by sacrificing himself in order to call the attention of and to seek help from the people of the world. And this is the letter that he wrote to Martin Luther King. And I think this is a very interesting sort of a letter which I shared in the group. So I would open up the class now for any reflections or any comments that you might like to add to, or anything that is there on your mind.
May I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
This the seeing Vietnamese monks burn themselves, self-immolation, was my first exposure. I was in school during the Vietnam War. It was my first introduction to Buddhism. I'd not heard anything about Buddhism before, really. And it had a powerful effect. So this story has a very, very personal meaning for me. That great sacrifice, and because of that, I abhor war, and I was so ashamed of my country and what happened. But that Buddhism offered a way out of violence and a way of giving. That was my first impression, my first experience.
Very beautiful, Vishaka. That's very, very touching.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very, very. So any of you, please feel free to engage and talk or whatever you want to comment or even disagree, because it's, as we said, that we can debate as to what he did was right or wrong. There is so much in the story, and we are never going to reach the conclusion, but we know how powerful this story is. Just to imagine that somebody is willing to sacrifice his body for the sake of others, that mind, and that to gladly, is something deeply inspiring.
Jai Bhim, Dr. Sahab.
Yes, Umesh.
Sir, very means thank you to you for taking such a good initiative for this learning the Buddhism. Now the question in my mind are, does these Jataka are successful in establishing the characters of the animals for the people to learn the flora and fauna about the animals, and relating these their flora and fauna with the morals that will teach the person to live the life in a Buddha way. One thing, and another thing, do such research are available where we can establish the characteristics of the animals used in the Jataka, like elephant, pigeon, and means a lot of peacocks. More than 27 to 30 animals have been used in the Jatakas, sir.
Ken, would you like to say something on this, Vishaka?
I just, it's wonderful to me to reading the Jatakas to realize that in the course of samsara, in the course of his quest as Bodhisatta, he was reborn as so many things. Somebody asked recently, I saw online, if the Bodhisatta was recorded as a woman. And I thought that's kind of funny because, I mean, how many lives have we spent? How would it be possible that he hadn't been? But we have the Bodhisatta as so many different animals and always against animal sacrifice.
I
That
got your point. Yeah, there is no women, no.
yeah, I mean, really.
Yeah.
So the idea that we've all been everything, including we've been tree devas, we've been everything, we will be everything as we continue on. That we're seeing ourselves in a way when we look at every living thing.
Yes.
I think that in order for the Buddha to obtain omniscience, he has to have experienced everything. So he could see reality from the viewpoint of every animal, every sentient being,
Yes.
in every aspect. And that's why it was important for him to have taken birth as an animal,
Of course.
as a woman, as
everything,
sometimes
yeah.
as a Brahmin, sometimes as an outcast, in order to understand everything.
Everything. And when the Bodhisattva says, I can see how many eons back. Yes. With he has the memory. We don't have the memory.
You don't know that.
We don't have the memory. That's the great thing.
Yeah. I think this Buddhism is always, these Buddhist stories have always unfolded in the nature, starting from the Buddha's life onwards, and we see a lot of these beautiful stories have unfolded in the forest or in the very natural settings. And there is one Jataka where the Buddha is insect as well, Bodhisattva to be He's an insect as well, but unfortunately, there is no, he's not born as a woman, right? There are 4, 5 criterias. I will put it in the next class, but that's why we have to have this. We have to be beware about the, as a readers when we engage with the Jataka Tales, because they were redacted often number of times, and sometimes the redactors might bring in their perspective. Now there are very good, interesting research papers which shows how the firebrand women nuns were silenced by the very heretical monks even at the time of the Buddha, and these stories have to be brought up, and the different voices in Buddhist text have to be brought up, so that there is no silence or anything. So you see, there is a lot in that area, and I think we will begin to know. And I'm sure we can construct a list of all the animals that the Buddha became in these Jataka tales. So I think that's an exercise for you, Umesh, to find out how many times the Buddha became the various animals. Yeah.
Sure, sir.
So
Sure, sir.
Jamin,
And this has set the narrative about the animals in the people, how the animals behave, and you have to tackle those animals in the way the narrations has been created.
yeah. So we will take this last thing because we have exceeded our time. I asked for 15 minutes more. So we are there. Yes, Jamin, last thing.
Yeah. So like, I don't have any question, but sort of two comments.
Yeah.
First, since we were actually discussing like about any jatak in which we see bodhisattva being a woman, like since my childhood, I've always been fascinated by Panchtantra and Hitopdesh and Jatak Kathaएं. So I like vaguely remember there was at least one Jatak in which there is this bodhisattva who is born as a woman, just to correct her greedy husband. So
Good,
I
good.
don't remember more, but I do remember that there is at least one Jatak Katha or one Jatak tale which is there. So this was like first comment. Second is like as we saw in even in that sort of Jatak in which the story of monkey and crocodile,
Hmm.
and even the Jatak which I read, this tigress one. So in both the cases, we do see that sort of chetana or intention becomes a sort of very crucial component or lens through which the bodhisattva's actions are to be seen. Because even in that, the crocodile and monkey one, it might be seen that monkey is being slightly clever, but we have to see that the intention was outsmarting the evil, not even doing evil to the evil, but outsmarting the evil. So that is one thing. And even here, like it's pretty obvious and understandable in the Jatak which I read that the intention was to show more compassion towards tigress and her cubs. So yeah, these were like two things from my side.
Yeah. Good. I think you can engage in the group. We got a lot of members in the group, and I'm sure there are a lot of things which can be thrashed out there. So let's end our class today, and see you next week. Thank you so much for joining in. See you next week with more
Thank you,
interesting
sir.
stories.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
sir.